Hello everyone. Last time we talked about move 3 within the discussion and conclusion sections, and today we're going to discuss the last move, move 4, which is establishing additional territory. So previously we discussed the other 3 moves within the discussion and conclusion sections, and as I said, today we're really going to focus on this ultimate move, establishing additional territory. And it's a rather important move within the discussion and conclusion sections. It can appear either in separate discussion sections or in a combined discussion conclusion sections, but it's even more common in separate conclusion sections by itself. Or in a separate conclusion section, rather. Remember that, as always, even though we've labeled these moves in numerical order and we're discussing this as the last move, it can appear in different places depending on how a particular paper or discipline is organized. The purpose of move 4 is to really allow authors to move beyond the findings of their particular study and to really discuss them within a broader context of the discipline at large and to draw connections and conclusions between their results and that broader discipline, to evaluate and discuss really the significance of the findings of that particular study, as well as to recommend further actions and to kind of lay out a path for future research. So within move 4, we have 4 steps. And these steps, some of them may or may not appear depending on your particular discussion conclusion sections. We're going to go through each step separately, and we'll discuss the main functions of that step, some types of language that can indicate that a sentence is functioning in that way, as well as look at some example sentences. And of course, remember that although we'll discuss each of these in isolation, they can occur in different order, as well as the authors can overlap and divide sentences up in different ways depending on how they're building their arguments and making their claims. So let's look at the first step, generalizing results. So here's our first step, as I said, generalizing results. And the function of this step is really to just develop general claims and conclusions about your results. So to expand beyond the precise factual findings into a more general statement. So we might also talk about making inferences, making general claims or general conclusions. And authors often do this by summarizing, synthesizing, or making deductions from the results that they developed. So we can use this step to help really broaden the scope of the specific findings of our study. Rather than our study tells us this very narrow specific thing, we may want to look at the more broader implications of what our study might suggest, to really expand the meaning of our findings beyond the limited framework of our study. It's true here, but it may also be true in these other expanded places. And we might also discuss and deliberate on the generalizability, transferability, reliability, validity, any of these sorts of things, depending on the needs of our study and the needs of our results. So here's one example. This sentence says, because the 2 case study hospitals are typical and we're confronted with the problem of pharmaceutical residues in wastewater for the first time, we believe it is safe to generalize conclusions also to other European countries. For stakeholders from the water and health sector, knowing that pharmaceuticals enter water bodies is disturbing despite large uncertainty concerning environmental effects. So we can see here that the authors have actually quite nicely, for our purposes, restated a little bit of the finding, and then are clearly generalizing this finding to a broader context than their particular study. They had a case study, but they're saying that this is probably true in a larger context, and they're saying other European countries is the context they're generalizing to. Okay, our next step that we're going to discuss today is stating the value. And this step functions to allow the authors to really discuss the significance of their study or the results of their study. And authors often do this by pointing out and highlighting the valuable findings from their study. They may have discussed many things, but this is a place where you may draw attention to particularly important or valuable findings. And you can do this to advocate for that importance, to really make sure you're highlighting and stressing this important finding, and also to show some specific contributions of your study. So here we have an example, and this quite short sentence says, our study provides the first species-specific empirical calibration for 1S pistillata and massive Portes sp. So we get some useful information here, even though we don't necessarily know all of the details of what the sentence says, but that their study is providing the first the first one of these species-specific calibrations for these two different species. And the authors, by putting this here, are making it clear that even if we don't know what they're talking about, that this is an important thing, that they're suggesting this is quite important and that it has some value for them and for others in their field. Okay, the next step is called noting implications. And this step can be quite important because it allows authors to discuss the potential implications of their study or the results of that study. And we can use this step to explain how our results might be applied more broadly in research, different types of practice or theory, to show a larger impact of our results or of the study, and to also discuss possible consequences of our results or the study at large. And so we can see here the authors say, this result has promising implications for organic growers, since it suggests that 1 or 2 years with good weed control can rapidly reduce seed banks following years with imperfect weed control. So they're telling us that their results has suggestions, has promising implications, and that these results imply something that they don't necessarily know entirely from their findings, but that this is the implication of their results. Okay. Our final step within Move 4 is proposing directions. And the function of this step is, as much like it says, is to really provide recommendations and suggestions for future research, for future directions of where research in this vein should follow. And authors use the step to assert the need for future work, to kind of be a call to action, that other people enter this area and conduct more research, to continue to address the niche that they've laid out from the very beginning of the paper, and to kind of outline a path of research, and to also announce follow-up or ongoing research by the same authors, to really indicate the line of research that they themselves plan to be pursuing. And so we can see here the authors say, needless to say that it should be followed by a more comprehensive approach associated with the anticipated damages caused by drought phenomena once the proposed simplified procedure has quantified the basic elements of drought. Okay, so the authors are saying, that they've identified this path that others, or perhaps themselves, should be undertaking to know more about this area that they're interested in studying. Okay, so our next step here is to look at some examples. Now, as always, I'll give you the example, and then I'd like you to pause your video so you get a chance to actually read the sentence and consider which step most closely matches the functions that you see in the sentence. And then, of course, start your audio up again, and we'll talk through it together. So here's your first step. Okay, you got a chance to read this one. Let's look at it together. This sentence says, this study has ignited the interest for follow-up research exploring the journey that 10 to 12-year-old children who are underachieving in reading have encountered, including home, community, preschool, school, specialist programs, and health issues. And from the very beginning of this sentence, we can say, we can see how there's this function of stating the value. The authors are saying this study has ignited the interest for follow-up research, that they are really talking about how important, how interesting, and are using quite exciting words here, ignited the interest. So they're really trying to advocate for how important, how valuable this line of research is. Okay, here's our next sentence. All right, so our next sentence says, thus, clinical application of cinnamon could be considered as a potential therapeutic option in humans in the treatment of insulin-resistant states. Okay, and this sentence we can see has evidence of noting implications. So the authors say that the application could be considered an option. So the authors aren't saying that this is the actual result, but that there's some implication here. This could be, this suggests or implies that this application could be a potential therapy. Okay, our next sentence. Okay, for here we have, it should also be highlighted that even though the presented calibration approach was qualified for an optical system, including a microscope, the concept behind the procedure remains valid for all measurement scales, micro and macro, as long as the quality of the ellipsoidal particle images is high enough. And we can see here at the middle of the sentence really helps us identify that this is an example of generalizing results. The authors here are saying that although their research was done, as they say, for an optical system including a microscope, the concept behind their research remains valid for other things. So that they're saying that their results, or in this case their approach, is generalizable to other sorts of systems. All right, here's our next sentence. And in this sentence we have, in this way, the investigation of the spatial peculiarities of insulinase from various producers must be expanded and developed, because the question of the existence and character of quaternary structure in this group of enzymes has not been finally solved. And we have here that the authors are saying the investigation of this particular thing must be expanded and developed. Because, which we haven't even highlighted, at the very end, it has not been solved. The authors are suggesting, or proposing directions, they're suggesting a path of research that should be followed to really answer some crucial questions in their field. Okay, so now that we've walked through the 4 steps within the last move, here in the discussion and conclusion section, you've got a few tasks to do. Look at the reading and look at your corpus. Of course, this is a really important piece because the structure of discussion and conclusion sections varies so widely. So you'll really want to see how authors apply this move and these steps within your own corpus. Complete your corpus exploration tasks and quizzes. And in the next presentation, we're going to really try to synthesize all the different steps and moves that make up discussion conclusion sections. And we're going to analyze a sample discussion conclusion section to really see how all these pieces fit together.